15 KKK members laughed when Bumpy walked in alone. 8 minutes later, they weren't laughing, they laughed when Bumpy Johnson stepped inside alone. Too quiet, too calm. In that room, laughter felt safe until the silence stretched and everyone realized restraint can be heavier than fear. The door opened without announcement. No pause, no hosetashchen, just the quiet scrape of wood against floor. Bumpy Johnson stepped inside alone. The room didn't stop breathing, but it noticed. Conversations thinned. Chairs shifted. A few heads turned slowly, like they didn't trust their own eyes. This wasn't how men like him were supposed to arrive. No entourage, no warning, no show of force. That's what made it funny to them. A laugh slipped out first. Not loud. Testing. Then another. Soon the sound spread. Casual, careless, confident. Bumpy didn't react. He stood where the light broke unevenly across the floor, coat still buttoned, hat still on. His face gave nothing away. No anger, no offense, just calm observation, like a man counting exits instead of insults. They watched him the way hunters watch something they believe is already cornered. 15 men, white shirts, dark jackets, cigarette smoke hanging low, curling toward the ceiling. Some leaned back in their chairs. Others stayed standing, arms crossed, enjoying the imbalance of numbers. Someone muttered something meant to travel. Someone else smiled too wide. Bumpy let the laughter finish. He didn't rush to fill the space. Silence, he knew, was heavier than words. Silence made men uncomfortable. It made them talk too much. And already they were doing exactly that. He took one step forward, then another. The floor creaked. Old building. Cheap confidence. Still no one stopped him. That alone should have told him something. Bumpy's eyes moved slowly, deliberately. He met faces without challenging them. No staring, no flinch, just acknowledgement, as if he were memorizing who would remember this moment, and who wouldn't get the chance. Outside that room, Harlem didn't rush. It didn't panic. It didn't ask questions. Harlem waited. That's what power looks like when it's settled into the bones of a place. No alarms, no messengers running the streets. Just a quiet understanding moving from doorway to doorway, from counter to counter. Bumpy Johnson hadn't brought Harlem with him. He didn't need to. It was already there. On Lenox Avenue, a shopkeeper paused mid-transaction, eyes lifting for no clear reason. A porter leaned against a brick wall a second longer than usual. In a back room, cards stopped shuffling. Somewhere, a phone rang and rang before anyone answered. No one said his name. They didn't have to. Bumpy's authority didn't come from noise. It came from memory, from how disputes ended, from how neighborhoods stayed intact while others burned, from the fact that children walked home in the evening without learning the sound of gunfire first. People didn't follow him because they were afraid of him. They followed him because life stayed orderly when he was involved. Inside the room, the men laughing had no idea they were already surrounded, not by bodies but by consequence. They saw one man standing alone. Harlem saw a boundary being tested. Bumpy felt it too, not as pressure, as confirmation. He stood still, listening to the room breathe, but his awareness stretched far beyond those walls. He knew who would hear about this meeting by nightfall. He knew which rumors would travel faster than facts. He knew which silences would be interpreted correctly. That's why he didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't explain. Men who explain are already on the back foot. One of the seated men leaned forward, elbows on the table, confidence dripping from the gesture. He spoke again, louder this time. Enough to draw attention. Enough to make this moment feel public, even inside closed walls. Bumpy met his eyes calmly, and that look was Harlem's answer. Not anger, not defiance. Certainty. The certainty of a man who knows that when lines are crossed, the response doesn't come immediately. It comes correctly. It comes where it hurts most, and it doesn't always wear a face. Outside, Harlem kept moving, but it remembered. And inside that room, while laughter still echoed weakly, Bumpy Johnson remained silent. because silence, backed by a city, is never empty. The laughter softened. Not gone, but thinner now. Forced. One of them finally spoke. A joke dressed as hospitality. A question that wasn't really a question. The kind meant to remind a man he's outnumbered. Bumpy listened. Nodded once. That nod wasn't agreement. It was patience. He took off his hat and held it at his side. Not submission. Ritual. Respect for a room that hadn't earned it yet. You boys seem comfortable, he said quietly. No threat in the words. That was the mistake. They leaned into it. More laughter. Louder now. Relief, maybe. The relief of men who believe danger announces itself. Who think power needs volume. Bumpy didn't correct them. He simply stood there, letting the room finish misjudging him. Because outside those walls, outside that laughter, Harlem was already listening. And inside, whether they knew it or not, the balance had begun to shift. The men in white hoods thought they could intimidate him, thought silence was weakness, thought Harlem was a backdrop for their spectacle. They didn't know how deeply Bumpy understood fear, how deeply he commanded respect without shouting. The room smelled of tobacco and tension. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like a warning, curling around polished table edges. Each hooded figure leaned back, trying to appear relaxed, but their fingers drummed. Eyes flicked, searching for signals, looking for allies. They believed they controlled the narrative. Bumpy's entrance hadn't flinched. Not a twitch, not a glance aside. He walked straight into the center, suit pressed, tie narrow, shoulders squared. Every step measured, every breath deliberate. The contrast between his calm and their jittery movements widened the room. One could feel it like a weight settling. They tried jokes. Small, mocking, meant to unsettle. Harlem had taught them nothing yet. Bumpy let the words fall. They bounced off him like bullets on steel. No eye roll. Noise none. Just observation. Silence. Measured. A shield and a weapon at once. The Grand Dragon, seated at the head, tightened his grip on the edge of the table. Sweat gleamed at his temple. He leaned forward as if to assert dominance, but Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't blink faster than necessary. One hand resting lightly on the tabletop, the other tucked near his side. It was almost a casual stance, except nothing about it was casual. A subtle shift in the air. The room recognized it before the men did. The power was quiet, patient, inevitable. The hoods glanced at each other. Nervous chuckles, thin and brittle, replaced confident laughter. They were beginning to understand the cost of underestimating him. Bumpy allowed the moment to stretch. Not to gloat, not to threaten, just to exist. Let them fill the silence with their own panic. Let them reveal themselves without him lifting a finger. That was how control worked, through patience, through letting others write their own downfall. The city outside hummed unknowingly. Harlem had its ears everywhere, felt every misstep. The hoods thought this meeting isolated, private. It wasn't. Bumpy's presence carried the weight of a neighborhood, a community who had seen lines drawn and respected. That weight pressed invisibly against each hooded chest, settling uneasily. One man shifted. A chair squeaked under tension. Another swallowed, eyes darting. Every nervous gesture became a revelation. They had stepped into his world, uninvited. They would leave understanding that the joke was over. Bumpy's gaze stayed steady, calm, assured. The air thickened with expectation. Not violence yet. But the room knew, when action came, it would be absolute, precise, and remembered. The insult had already spread through Harlem like smoke from a back alley fire. Whispers at the corner stores, hurried words in the barber shops, tense conversations spilling onto stoops. Everyone knew what had been said, who had said it, and what it implied. The Klan had thought their mockery private. They were wrong. Bumpy stood at the edge of his club, a quiet figure in a crowd that had gathered instinctively. Men, women, children, they all leaned in slightly, feeling the tension roll off him like heat from an open oven. His coat hung straight, hat tilted just so, hands relaxed but ready. The calm before a storm, but the storm wasn't his to unleash yet. From the street, someone shouted the insult again. A name, a jeer. The crowd froze. Harlem held its collective breath. The words hung in the air, meant to humiliate, meant to incite. Instead, they ripened slowly, their venom undone by observation. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't allow his body to betray emotion. Every heartbeat in that street seemed synchronized to his quiet pulse of control. The Klan, unaware, had underestimated the neighborhood's eyes. From windows above, men watched, leaning from fire escapes. Women clutched their coats tighter, silent witnesses. Children peeked from behind railings, learning lessons about power, fear, and restraint. Bumpy's quiet presence was louder than any yell. He let them speak, let them parade their arrogance. Each word a misstep they didn't notice. Harlem's code was subtle. Observe, assess, act when the moment is irrevocable. And Bumpy had already assessed. The insults were paper boats on a river, drifting toward inevitable consequences. One man tried to approach, sneering, thinking intimidation was a matter of proximity. Bumpy tilted his head slightly, a motion so small it could be missed. That tiny gesture, calm, deliberate, made the man pause. Sweat flickered on his brow. Confidence faltered. Every inch closer became a decision weighed, a calculation, a warning. The crowd shifted, a living barrier, yet no one stepped between them. They didn't need to. Bumpy's authority had long since filled the street, invisible but undeniable. Respect was enforced not by threat, but by inevitability. They understood the cost of stepping too far. By the time the moment stretched fully, the insult had turned to silence. A hush over Lenox Avenue. No applause. No confrontation. Just the city recognizing restraint as power, and those who had spoken too loudly realizing the space they had occupied was no longer theirs. Bumpy's eyes scanned the street once, slowly, deliberately. Each glance was measured, precise, teaching without raising a hand. Harlem remembered. The Klan, if they could read it, would understand that misjudgment was expensive, and that lesson, quiet as it was, would echo far longer than any shout. Bumpy stepped into the room as if he owned every inch of it. The back room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and polished wood, an office where deals were made and threats measured. His coat swung lightly over his shoulders, casting a shadow across his unreadable eyes. The men seated at the table, 15 strong, laughed when he arrived. Confident, carefree, mistaking humor for advantage. The laughter faded as he stopped just short of the table. Silence fell instantly, sharp and precise, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you question the air you breathe. The tallest among them shifted nervously, fumbling with his cufflink. Another cleared his throat, but the sound cracked under the weight of observation. Every motion was under scrutiny. Every heartbeat felt loud. Bumpy did not speak. He never needed to. The room adjusted to his presence, realigning its tension around his calm. The men expected reaction, wanted fury, theatrics, a show of dominance. Instead, they found stillness, quiet, control, so absolute it was almost cruel. One small step forward, deliberate and measured, drew the room into his orbit. A hand twitched toward a revolver tucked beneath a jacket. Bumpy's eyes locked with it, not threatening, not commanding, simply acknowledging. That small acknowledgement, enough to let the man reconsider. Sweating palms stayed down, fingers unclenched. The air thickened with unspoken rules. Disrespect costs, and hesitation is a decision you pay for. The room held its collective breath. Every man there, calculating, measuring, wondering how the calm figure in the dark suit could command without words. And then he moved again, a slow shift, settling near the door. The laughter that had welcomed him was gone. The smirks dissolved. Fear settled softly over the table like dust, invisible yet undeniable. Bumpy's dominance was not declared, It was inherited. The lesson was simple. Power is quiet. It does not announce itself. It arrives. And when it does, even the boldest, most arrogant figures recognize the inevitability of their misstep. By the time he left, the room had changed. Posture, attitude, attention, they had all been corrected without a single raised voice, without blood drawn. Outside, Harlem would later recount the story. How 15 men entered with arrogance and left subdued, their confidence replaced by uncertainty. The neighborhood understood another layer of the city's rules. Bumpy's power was quiet, yet absolute. Respect was earned not through spectacle, but through measured action. The consequences, slow and deliberate, left no question. The calm man always controls the room. 3 days later, the Hudson whispered a story no one could ignore. The river carried the remnants of reckoning, a silent message that traveled faster than words ever could. Harlem, always alert, watched, listened, and understood. The Grand Dragon, the man who had underestimated Bumpy Johnson, was found floating, a grotesque punctuation in a narrative of control and consequence. Bumpy walked Lenox Avenue as if nothing had happened. The streets were lined with familiar faces, shopkeepers, musicians, old friends. Each nod, each subtle glance